So, because it is February, which is Black History Month, I wanted to share with you one of the coolest, most badass people I know that no one talks about for some reason. His name is Robert Smalls. I have basically his whole life story condensed into a script, so I'm going to do some oversimplifications because obviously I'm not going to get into every single detail. Also, like I said, I have a script, so I'm going to be reading a lot because I don't want to get any information wrong. So if it looks like I'm reading, I am. So, to start, he was born in 1839 in Beaufort, South Carolina, to a slave mother and unknown white slave owner. As a kid, his slave owner was fond of him, so he didn't make him go work out in the fields. But his mom actually made him go work out in the fields and watch people get whipped because he wanted him to understand the horrors of slavery and why it was awful, obviously. But at 12, he was sent to Charleston to work a bunch of different jobs. I'm not going to get into all of them because it's a lot. But in 1861, when the Civil War began with the Battle of Fort Sumter, which was in Charleston Harbor, he was assigned to work on a ship called the CSS Planter, CSS Confederate States ship. It was a lightly armed military transport ship, and he worked under Confederate forces. He was hardworking. He seemed content with working under Confederate forces. But in 1862, he did some badass shit. So, he had an escape plan that he created with the other slaves. They were going to take the ship, flee with their families, and go be free, basically. But while the boat was docked and the officers disembarked the ship, the other slaves stayed on and asked if they could bring their families aboard, and they were allowed. But at some point, some of the crew pretended to escort their families back home, but they actually snuck onto another ship. And then Smalls dressed up as the captain and sailed the ship past Confederate blockades by memorizing their ship whistle signals that they used to communicate with other ships and forts. While he was working on the planter, he memorized them. So he picked up his and everyone else's families and continued on the mission. There were some close calls while sailing past the 5 Confederate harbor forts they had to go through, especially one where he sailed super close to the fort to avoid suspicion, and they had the hope that they wouldn't notice. Morning was approaching, so they had to hurry because obviously with sunlight, they can see everything. It was close. It was still dark, but it was close. So the fort was suspicious, but Smalls knew all the correct signals. So whenever they started blowing their whistle, Smalls would answer correctly. And eventually they were like suspicious, but like they got the right signals. So after like a long pause where everyone on this planter had sweaty palms, shaking their knees, and it's reported in the book that I saw an excerpt from, I can speak, that everyone was shaking knees, but Robert Smalls, he was like, nah, we chilling. He was cool, he was collected, it was badass. So after the long pause, they let them through, and after they passed the fort, they basically took a turn that gave them away, because instead of going the normal way, they went straight towards the Union blockade, because in Civil War, the Union blockaded the South. They went straight towards the Union blockade, but you're probably like, oh, so they're chilling. No, because you forget, they're on a Confederate ship, so they have a Confederate flag. So the Union sees that, and they're like, oh shit, we're about to get attacked. But while that's happening, they take the Confederate flag, they put it down, and then they put up the white surrender flag. And in the morning, it starts creeping, daylight starts coming out, and the Union ships are like, hold up, wait a minute, I see the surrender flag. That means they're chilling. So they go to the Union, they're chilling, they didn't get shot at. They basically surrendered themselves, all the military cargo that was on board, and happy ever after. But that's not it. He's a badass. He's one of the biggest badasses of all time. There's more. So he basically became like a Union celebrity. So up north, he became a celebrity. He joined the Union and actually piloted the repaired planter. He also piloted an ironclad, which is like an early battleship. It was called the USS Kyuk, which sunk after a hard-fought battle in Fort Sumter. He took it back to the Union Bay, and it sunk there overnight. Both under a captain. So he didn't captain them, he just piloted it. Eventually, he was piloting the planter again under a captain who basically, when they got shot at from land near Charleston, the captain ran and hid. And they were going to surrender, but Smalls is smart, right? He knew that they were to surrender and be captured. He wouldn't be treated as a prisoner of war and probably be killed for obvious reasons, right? So he took command of the ship and basically with his full badassery made it back to shore safely and sound. Everyone was safe and sound. And for that, he was promoted to the official captain of the planter and became the first African-American captain in the U.S. Navy. But that's not all. That's not all. He's a badass. Biggest badass in history, right? So after the war, with his newfound wealth that he earned for his heroic actions and service, this man went and bought his former slave owner's house with the money. The only reason he could do that is because basically the Union took his house because the original slave owner master had like tax fraud. So they took his house, and this man, Robert Smalls, bought it. And he actually let the wife of the former slave owner live there until she died. So he's nice. He's a badass, but he's also nice, right? He then invested a lot of time in reconstructing the Charleston, Beaufort area. He also got into politics and eventually got elected into the House of Representatives. So that's cool as shit. Whole bunch of other political drama happened I'm not going to get into, but it was some stuff, right? But eventually he started suffering from diabetes, and in 1915 he died of malaria and diabetes at the age of 75. So if that's not one of the most badass people in all of history, I don't know who is. Hope you guys enjoyed. I got more stories coming.